This is the Education Gadfly Show.
Welcome to the Education Gadfly Show. I'm Stephanie Disler, here to kick things off for this week's episode. Today, we're joined by Bryan Hassel, co-president of Public Impact, to discuss how redesigning school staffing through models like opportunity culture can boost both teacher retention and student success. Then, on Adam Tyner's final research minute, he shares a study on how ending compulsory religious education in German schools shaped students later in life, making them less religious but more likely to work and earn higher income as adults. All that and more this week on the Education Gadfly Show, starting now.
Hello, this is your host, Mike Petrilli of the Thomas B. Fordham Institute, here at the Education Gadfly Show and online at fordhaminstitute.org. And now, please welcome our special guest for this week, Bryan Hassel.
Hey, Mike. Hey, David.
Yeah, it is great to have you with us. Bryan is, what's the right title? Founder, co-founder, co-CEO?
Co-founder, co-president, along with Emily Askew Hassel, Public Impact.
Okay, great. At Public Impact. So glad to have you on the show. I was just saying before, Bryan, we must have had you on maybe in our early days. I used to know Bryan as a charter school guy. We would see each other at meetings at the Department of Ed and other places talking about federal charter school policy. And then you abandoned us and you left for greener pastures focused on teacher stuff instead. But I'm glad to have you back after all these years.
That's right. And charter schools have teachers too. I don't know if you noticed that, but we also work with charter schools on teacher stuff as well.
That's true, except for those new AI charter schools.
Oh, yeah. That's exciting.
David and I got to run into Bryan at the PyNet Summit a few weeks ago in Atlanta. We were saying such a fun conference, the only education conference I'm aware of that has a live band and a dance floor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
They know how to put on a good show.
They do indeed. That reminds me, I should welcome David to the show also. David Griffith, welcome.
Hey, Mike. Hey, Bryan. It's good to be here.
All right. Well, it is a little bit of a sleepy day here in Washington, D.C. It's cloudy out there, as you can tell behind me. But it does not mean that we are not excited to talk about opportunity culture, which is the big initiative that Bryan and Emily and their team at Public Impact has been working on all these years. Let's talk about it on Ed Reform Update. All right, Bryan, so I have been watching from afar this rollout of opportunity culture, and I feel like I think I know what it's about. For example, if somebody asked me, I'd say, well, I think it's about making sure that the best teachers in our schools have a chance to maximize their impact on student learning, take on new and different kinds of roles. But you can probably say it better than I can. I was saying before the show, I also noticed a new study out of North Carolina, where you all live, on advanced teacher roles, which it sounds like is can support opportunity culture, but there are other approaches as well. I know a lot of people kind of think, well, is this what they're doing at Arizona State around team teaching? Help us understand all of this, Bryan.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. And it's been 12 years now since we started working in Charlotte, Mecklenburg, and now reaching about 225,000 students around the country. So it's been a good run. And yeah, you pretty much got it, Mike. Emily, the co-president here, inventor of this model, was really starting to think, how can the great teachers that we have already in our schools reach more students? Because they're all reaching about a quarter of kids in the one teacher, one classroom model. How could they take responsibility for more? And that's what led to the Opportunity Culture Initiative. And what it really looks like primarily is great teachers, proven record of high growth learning for their kids, lead teams of 3 to 8 other teachers and take responsibility for, say, the whole third grade or the whole 8th grade science department, and then lead all the teachers towards getting high growth for their students in the same way that they would do as a teacher. And they keep teaching, and they earn a lot more money for taking on that role, averaging about 23% supplements funded within existing budgets. There are other innovative roles that are part of it, but the multi-classroom leader team is the essence of it.
Okay, that's interesting. And so they are, it was fair to say they're a teacher leader. This is a teacher leadership.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I mean, look, this is not brand new, right? I'm sure Checker, if he were here, would remind us that back in the 80s, he helped Lamar Alexander, when Lamar was governor of Tennessee, develop a career ladders initiative, right? I mean, these ideas have been floating around for a while.
That's right. I mean, I think what we're really trying to build on here are really some specific components that we found over the years to be correlated with high growth learning. So that's that super selectivity. This isn't getting a job because you've been around for a long time, but rather because you've shown growth with your students on test scores. It's a real leadership role. You're accountable for the whole grade level or the whole subject department and all those students. So it's not just a title. You're responsible. And there's a lot of time created in the schedule for this role. So it's not just a title where you kind of have your normal job and you got to try to somehow tack this on. It's built into your schedule through redesign. And then finally, it's high paid. 23% stipends are pretty significant and kind of changing your career trajectory if you're in one of these roles. So there are a lot of differences with the past, but definitely trying to pick up on, a long history of teacher leadership teams that has never really taken off.
So, and the pay thing is important. I mean, there was a great Education Week article just recently about how states are trying again on merit pay. That's probably a terrible brand for it. But trying not to touch some of the third rails that we touched a decade ago with teacher evaluation and tying it to test scores. I mean, this sounds like a kind of a hybrid. I mean, you are identifying these teachers through test scores and growth measures, right? But I guess the argument to the unions is, hey, they're getting paid more because their jobs are different. And so maybe that kind of differentiation goes down smoother with the teacher groups. Is that true?
It really seems to. There's much less opposition to this kind of approach. And I think it's because they are taking on more responsibility, and that includes helping other teachers get better. So new teachers aren't just thrown off the deep end. They're part of a team. They have this team leadership from the start. We've also seen places that stack this kind of role compensation on top of performance compensation of other kinds. You may have seen Dr. Scott Murray testified along with Marty West and Rick Hanushek, probably Gadfly past for participants before the U.S. Help Committee. And Dr. Murray was the superintendent of Ector County Schools in Texas. And so there are 77 teachers in Ector now that are making six figures in a place where the starting salary is about $60,000. And that's because they're getting that TIA, the teacher incentive allotment, which is a Texas performance-based pay. And then they're also multi-classroom leaders getting that additional role pay. Between those two, the highest paid one's making $132,000 a year, and it goes down from there, all in six figures.
Yeah, no, that's great. And we have been talking a lot about that teacher incentive allotment. I think we're going to continue to do so. It's I think David called it the biggest merit pay program in history. So tell us just a little bit more, and then I'll let David get in here. When you think about what these folks are actually doing day to day to try to help their colleagues improve, like, can you just paint a picture for us? What does that look like?
Yeah, it's a multifaceted role. It involves planning, so helping get ready for the lessons the teachers are about to give, which means prepping the high quality instructional materials they're using, preparing them to understand those, if there's any kind of science of reading or other research-based instructional methods being rolled out, training the team on those, and then looking at student data together, analyzing and deciding how that affects what we should be doing next. So there's that kind of team planning part. Then they're also out in other teachers' classrooms a lot. So they are co-teaching, modeling, pulling small groups. So the students in the other classes kind of think of them as an extra teacher for part of the week, as well as observing the other teachers in action and then meeting with them offline to give them feedback and coaching. And then finally, they keep teaching their own students in some way, or at least doing that kind of small group work in the other teachers' classes. So they're still a teacher. They're not sitting in the office. They're out with kids all the time. And then they're earning that extra salary. And I think I mentioned this, but it's really important that salary is an extra salary, and the other costs of this are paid for out of the regular budgets of the schools. A team of teachers figures out what to reallocate. It's not paid for by grants, and therefore it can keep going over time. That's another difference with some of these career ladders of the past, where there was a special state line item and then it went away, or there was a grant from the federal government and then it went away. So we're trying to avoid that.
Okay. David?
Yeah, that's all great. In fact, it sounds really nice to have someone like that to help you. What a thought. Um, I guess my question is, first of all, I have sort of the dim sense that this sort of thing is growing, but I also get the sense that it's growing pretty slowly. Is that
Yeah.
fair?
That is accurate. 225,000 is a lot more than we were reaching in 2013 when this started, but that's obviously just a small fraction of the number of kids out there. And it's a shame because we're seeing pretty strong learning results from this model. When kids join, third party evaluations are saying that they're making an extra 2 to 7 months of learning growth per year when their teachers are part of these teams. We just compiled the data from North Carolina and saw that certified opportunity culture schools, of which there are 222 in North Carolina, were 2 or 3 times as likely to make high growth as other schools. That's the kind of top tier of the state's growth accountability center. Only about 21% of Title I schools made high growth compared to 43% of these certified schools. So scale is an issue because a lot of kids and teachers aren't being reached. So we can talk about maybe some state policies that could help move along towards more of this kind of model around the country.
Yeah, I mean, that obviously makes sense. I have a sense of why the unions might not love this, right? But there are a lot of schools out there that actually aren't unionized, right? Both traditional public schools and charters. And yet I get the sense that this isn't just, flowering everywhere, right? That you look. Can you just speak to that? Because it seems like, I don't know. I mean, it's not
Mhm.
quite, doesn't quite rise to the level of common sense, but it doesn't seem unworkably difficult to put into place. Is it just that there's a very strong cultural norm against this sort of differentiation within education, or do leaders just does it not occur to them? Am I mischaracterizing the way things are out there?
I think everything you said has some validity. It is. We all went to school in the one teacher, one classroom model. Those of the all who have been teachers taught in that model probably, and so it is kind of ingrained in our minds for sure. I think it's not a humongous undertaking to change over to this model, but it does take some change. It's not just something you can buy and there you have it. You have to go through the thinking of what is our staffing model going to be here? What is our schedule? How are we going to change it? How are we going to reallocate the funds, like I mentioned? So there is some effort. It takes a period of months to plan it. And so uh, even if there aren't any barriers to it, as you're alluding, there is some effort required. And that's why, one of the roles states could play, and one of the roles they played in North Carolina, which is why we see so much of this there, is making a kind of annual process of inviting districts to become part of this kind of change, giving them some funding for their own team, or perhaps to hire us or some other organization to help them make the change. And that kind of annual funding plus a prompt really has made it more likely that districts and schools would make the change. And there are barriers. I think we shouldn't be Pollyannish about it. If class sizes are really restrictive, or if fundings can't be reallocated, it makes it more difficult. Schools kind of find a way around these things for the most part, but it makes it harder. Unions sometimes have opposed this, but we've seen a couple of unions, Baltimore and Indianapolis, have built this into the collective bargaining agreement where the opportunity culture stipends are listed out right in there. We've seen some unions let schools decide if they want to participate. So there's like a teacher voting process. So
Mhm.
it's not, usually there's no absolute barrier. Usually where there's a will, there's a way, but an impetus to make a change plus some support, technical assistance, whatever it is to get over the hump is useful.
Yep. Where there's a will, there's a way. And look, I mean, some of this isn't brand new. I mean, the idea of
Mhm.
having a lead teacher for each grade level or
Sure.
a department chair, right? But the notion that we're going to take those roles more seriously, give people time in their schedule to do them. I don't know what the typical department chair in a high school gets, if it's usually just a one period or whatever, and really give them line responsibility over the people that they manage and pay them a lot more. I mean, I think that's exciting. So, one last question, Bryan, if you don't mind, and I know, I mean, you probably see them as a peer group rather than a competitor, but the folks at Arizona State that are doing something somewhat similar. I mean, how would you describe the similarities and the differences?
Yeah, sure. We are peers in a lot of ways because we're both trying to overcome the one teacher, one classroom model and do something really different. I would say that ASU, Next Education Workforce, really centers on the idea of a team sharing a roster of students among the team. So like 4th grade teachers with 100 kids, and there's not one teacher for the 25, 25, 25, 25, but they all have the 100 as a group of 4. Whereas opportunity culture, which is kind of evolved, models have evolved over the years, really center on the idea of a team with a teacher leader who is jointly responsible for those students, and selective, as I mentioned, high paid and out of existing school budgets. Beyond that, the team could organize so all 4 other teachers share the 100, or they might keep more one classroom per teacher, all supported by the multi-classroom leader. So for us, the real core is teacher leaders paid more, selective, paid for out of school budgets, taking that full accountable teacher leadership role.
All right. Very well said. Thank you for helping to inform all of us about this. Folks should check it out. Again, Opportunity Culture. Check out Bryan and Emily's group, Public Impact. Bryan, the co-founder, co-president of Public Impact. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Now it's time for everyone's favorite Adams Research Minute. Adam, welcome back to the show.
Great to be back.
That is the last time I get to say that, Adam, unless we bring you back after you leave Fordham. This is your last time on the show before you go start an exciting new position in Oklahoma. For people that maybe didn't hear that episode when we talked about it, remind them again what you are getting to do there in your home state.
Well, sadly, this will be the last Adams Research Minute, at least for a while, but I'm going to be working at a new policy center at the University of Oklahoma, the Oklahoma Center for Education Policy. And looking forward to moving into my new office and getting started.
I like how you made it known as a condition of your employment that they had to get rid of Ryan Walters. And they did. I mean, that's incredible. Already the impact you've got there.
We've got major impact just in the last few weeks. Can't argue with that.
Just kidding. He seems to have skedaddled on his own, or we don't really know what's behind that. I guess maybe we'll find out.
Supposedly he's floating around Oklahoma City somewhere, so maybe we'll run into him.
Yeah, you might run into him. For listeners that are curious, it is late October. That means we have about, we think, 6 weeks until Amber is back at Fordham from her sojourn at IES. Of course, I'll be curious to know if there's anybody working in the federal government between now and then. That's an open question as we record this.
The government's shut down. Is she even working over there?
Exactly. I think she is allowed to work, but I don't know how much she can do.
I heard it was illegal to open your email during the shutdown or something. I read that in the New York Times today.
Yes, for certain employees, that is correct. So, but in the meantime, David is going to slide into the Research Minute slot at least some weeks, right, David? Is that right? That's our plan?
By some you mean all, but yes.
Oh, by all. I thought maybe we might sub in a few times. Maybe we'll try to give some other folks at Fordham a crack.
We'll see how desperate it gets, Mike.
I think we should have Dan Goldhaber do a Research Minute since we feature his studies all the time. Maybe Dan, and he's so good at promoting the show on social media on both
Dan's Research Minute. Why don't you do that for a couple months?
Dan's Research Minute. Well, all right. Now we could have a competition: Dan versus David.
Let's see how that first one goes for David.
It definitely requires more preparation to do the Research Minute than to be part of Ed Reform Update. I think
I have learned that.
Yes. All right. Well, enough with the blather. Let's do it, Adam. Your last Adams Research Minute, at least for a while. What you got for us?
All right. Well, today on Adams Research Minute, we have a new article from the Journal of Human Resources. Hat tip to our buddy Vlad Kogan, who sent me this a couple days ago. But before I get into the research, I want to tell you guys a quick story from my childhood about the first school board meeting that I ever attended. I think I was about 12 years old, and I didn't even go to public school at the time. I was being homeschooled at that time. And I can't tell you the details of the policy that was being discussed, but I do know that the school board meeting was packed. People were passionate about the issue. Do you all want to take a guess as to what why that meeting was so full and what the topic was at that meeting? You guys know about how old I am and maybe what might have drawn people to the school board meetings?
Oh my goodness. This is this is such a good question.
The
But
culture wars of yesteryear.
what would it have been? Let's see. This is probably after Nancy Reagan's Just Say No. So maybe we're into Tipper Gore's crusade against music with like rap music with terrible lyrics. Is that what we're talking?
David, any guesses?
I plead youth. I have no idea.
Well, to be honest, this culture war or legal battle may have been solved decades earlier, but in Oklahoma, we were still probably debating it, as we do with a lot of things. And the topic was prayer in schools.
Yes.
Yeah, of course, we're here in the buckle of the Bible Belt, is what they call it. And on that topic, people had opinions. I think they still have a lot of diverging opinions on that topic. And prayer in schools, it raises a number of questions, constitutional questions, ethical questions, but it also raises a question of whether it makes any difference to students. I mean, we have enough problems getting students to learn academic subjects. Maybe religion in school doesn't really make that much of a difference to students' lives. This new study answers that question, and the short answer is yes, it matters. So let's get into it. The data come not from Oklahoma, but from Germany, where state-level reforms between 1972 and 2004 replaced compulsory religion with a choice between religion courses and non-religious ethics courses. This is a core course, and German students to this day take a course like this every year from primary school all the way through high school. What is different about the newer choice model that I'll be referring to throughout the research minute here is that it allowed families to decide whether the student would receive Christian religious instruction or secular courses on ethics. And for students over 14, they got to decide for themselves which course they preferred. But all students took some kind of moral ethical coursework. And the difference here is that in some cohorts, it was exclusively religious, and in others, it was a choice of the family whether it would be religious or not. And I should just note that even to this day, the majority of families continue to choose the religious instruction option. So researchers will know this as an intent to treat approach. That means that the treated cohorts that we're talking about, the ones that got the choice, they didn't necessarily get the secular ethics courses. They got their choice, but then we're going to find the effect, the difference of having, either the choice or just the religious education. So the researchers link adults' outcomes to the state and year that they started primary school and estimate effects using two-way fixed effects models. That means that they're controlling for the year, the cohort, overall the year, and then they're controlling for the state, and what's left over you can attribute to the change in policy, which happened in different states in different years. The sample merges 3 nationally representative surveys of Germans describing about 58,000 adults who began school from 1950 to 2004. Now, since the data go back to the Cold War era, it's important to mention that the study includes only the 8 German states that were part of West Germany before reunification and had the religious instruction from the beginning. Bavaria, where Munich is, was the first state to switch to the choice model in 1972, and by 2004, all 8 of those states had switched. What they find is that religiosity falls for cohorts exposed to the choice regime. Relative to otherwise similar cohorts, affected adults are about 3 percentage points less likely to describe themselves as either rather religious or very religious, with a roughly 2 percentage point drop in the very religious category. Now, second, it's not just about religious identity. Religious behaviors move also. Personal prayer, church attendance, and formal church membership all decline. church membership reacts kind of like a one-time shift, but prayer and self-reported religiosity phase in gradually as younger cohorts spend more of their school years in the post-reform choice context. It's notable that these effects are concentrated in primarily Catholic counties. Protestant counties show weaker or imprecise changes. Now, the researchers also look at civic outcomes. What they find is that despite the lower religiosity, the reform doesn't make any difference to the ethics or civic outcomes that they are able to study. For example, they have data on how much people volunteer, on their life satisfaction, their satisfaction with democracy, and other topics. None of those outcomes are affected by the reforms. And they also are able to look at labor market outcomes. And believe it or not, they do find some small differences. The choice cohorts show slightly higher labor force participation, slightly higher employment, slightly longer work hours. Is very slightly, it's like half an hour a week, and somewhat higher earnings, although the earnings estimates are pretty noisy. They say that this could be because of a tilt towards more materialist orientations. Time reallocated from religious to economic activity is another possibility. And also, and this is probably also important, on the family side, fertility dips very slightly for the choice cohorts. So, do religion and schools mix? David, your thoughts? Just kidding. From this study, we learn that state-sponsored religious activities in schools do make a difference. There are some marginal students who are likely to be more religious as adults if they are compelled to participate in religious instruction at school. If you believe that will make a difference to their soul's final destinations, that's a pretty big finding. If, however, you care more about worldly outcomes of religious versus secular education, you can breathe easy because secular ethics courses seem to work just as well for promoting civic and personal well-being, and maybe even do a little better at promoting material well-being, since we had some workforce outcomes shifting after the introduction of those choices. What Americans, with our pesky wall of separation between church and state, might want to consider is why we're so afraid of any moral or ethical instruction in school and have to keep coming up with all these weird technocratic euphemisms like the whole child and social and emotional skills, when it's so obvious, at least to the Germans, that young people benefit from some moral guidance.
Whew, you promised us a banger, Adam, and you delivered. I love it. And I'm so glad that you mentioned the eternal outcomes. I was going to make a bad joke about how, yeah, for a lot of people who care a lot about religion, it's that very long-term outcome that they're really worried about. Hard to judge, at least right now with our current technology, in terms of your soul in the afterlife. But
it really does make a difference. I mean, you can understand why it ignites passions.
Oh, yeah. No. And look, now I would tweak you on the wall of separation between church and state, or at least let's remember that is not actually in the Constitution. Thank you very much. But that is a widely understood, at least we had a tradition of that there for a while. Look, this
for
is
a while.
What's that?
Just there for a while, we had a tradition of that.
Yeah, I mean, no, because Adam, I mean, look, it wasn't that long ago that our public schools explicitly were Protestant. I mean, there was school, prayer in school. They had the King James Bible. I mean, it was
okay.
That's why the Catholics started their own system back in the late 1800s, was because the public schools were Protestant. So then at some point
I see what you meant.
Yeah, that goes away, and now we're back to having this debate again with private school choice, ESAs, vouchers, tax credits, allowing public funds in one way or another to flow into religious schools. And you can see why people that, are religious themselves think the country would be better off if more people were religious, more kids grew up in a religious tradition. I think that this is good, that this means people are going to be the kids are going to be more likely to stay in their faith. And you understand why a lot of religious parents want this as well. I'm curious to you or to David. I mean, do you trust the methodology here?
So I would just say they did a ton of robustness checks on this, and these are some very buttoned up German economists. I mean, Luger Wussmann is one of the co-authors of this. He's one of the most famous education economists in the world, and these guys know what they're doing, and they ran a lot of robustness checks. They did placebo tests. They tried looking at the pre-trends to make sure. That's one of the things we worry about with these kind of difference things, is if some of the states were already trending one way before they introduced the reforms, and they find that these findings are robust to those different specifications and everything.
Adam, I have a question. You said it's a 3 percentage point effect. I think that is at the cohort level, right? In other words, the cohorts that came after the reform were 3 percentage points less likely to be religious. Do we have a sense of what percentage of kids within those cohorts chose the or their families? It's their families that make the choice. What percentage of the family?
Yeah. That's a really good question. They don't have the data on the individual students and which choice they made. But it is true that at the initial introduction of this, there were a lot of schools that didn't even offer the course immediately, right? Like the law was you had this choice that you could do whichever one you wanted, but they maybe didn't have a teacher who was ready to teach that course, or maybe nobody or very few people in the school were demanding it. And so in the first year, there may not have been a whole lot. And even to this day, most Germans continue to take the religious one. According to what I understand, it's a smaller share than you might think who are taking the secular ethical alternative.
Okay. I mean, obviously, the reason I'm asking, right, is that the sort of smaller the share is, right, the bigger the implied effect of the actual treatment is. And so it's like it seems like a really important number to me.
Yeah, no, I think it's really good to put that in context. I appreciate you bringing that up, David, because I think there's a couple things. First of all, if it's only like a third of the students who switch to the ethical thing, and then you'd have to think like if they had all been exposed to, if the other 2/3 had been exposed to the ethics class, the secular one, then you would have had an even larger effect, probably. That's the whole point of the intent to treat models, which are normally kind of underestimating the effect. But then there's probably maybe some social things that could be going on too, right? So if you go from 100% to 30% of the students taking this other thing, well, those kids know each other, and there may be some other kind of social contagion happening besides just the effect of taking the course.
No, and this is what's tricky, right? You'd like, okay, why was it that Bavaria, was the first one the place to go first? And, was there something going on in Bavaria that both explains why they went first and why, there was this impact on religiosity?
And I mean, that is what a lot of those robustness checks are getting at, right? Those pre-trends and stuff.
They try to nail that down the best they can. Yeah, well, and interesting, the Catholic versus Protestant. I mean, so I assume that this is still the way it works today, that is it at the county level that you did, like, which do you get? Do you get Catholic? Do you get Protestant? Is anybody getting Muslim?
It's at the individual level, by the way. So within a school, they have to offer these options. So it's now, and like I said, at the beginning when these things were getting rolled out, maybe that wasn't always with fidelity, but the individuals at the school level, it's not like the whole school does one or the other.
Okay. And you think within the school, they have to so there's like ethics or Catholic or Protestant, maybe Islam in some places.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I'm not sure about the varieties of religious denominations that may be reflected.
Yeah. All right.
I'll just say I think the lack of a major effect on, ethical or civic outcomes is food for thought for people on both sides of whatever conversation we're having here.
I think it is. I want to say just one more thing though. I'm just wondering why Americans are so, especially Americans on the left, are so freaked out by anything that sounds like it could be ethical or whatever. I was in a conversation with some liberals recently, and the word virtue came up, and they were like, "Look for the word virtue because that's probably a sign of Christian nationalism or something." And it's like, I mean, it's kind of, to me, and I hear this about classical schools too, like the classical model of charters and stuff, because they try to infuse some ethics and stuff into it. This freaks people out, and I'm a secularist person, but like I don't understand why people react so quickly to just anything that could be ethical, and then we're using these like other weird euphemisms, like I mentioned, earlier about the whole child or social and emotional skills, and a lot of that stuff does sound kind of ethically loaded, but not in a bad way to me. Maybe if you just called it ethics, it wouldn't freak the right out so much. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I mean, to me, there's an obvious answer, right? It's the culture wars. It's people on the left are worried that this is code for anti-gay or anti-feminist, right? People on the right are worried that any of this stuff is going to turn into liberal indoctrination, critical race theory, gender ideology. I mean, so I think people would say, hey, I'm fine with something around ethics or, whatever you want to call it, as long as it's in line with my own values. And, we have a hard time right now in this country figuring out how to come together. Though back to, your beginning there with saying this came with Vlad. We had a great event the other day with Vlad Kogan on our school board study by Michael Hartman and David Houston. And, one of the studies there is that the school boards seem to match their communities pretty well on the hot button culture war issues. So maybe this should be able to be figured out, right? More liberal places, the ethics thing will lean more left, and in more conservative places, it'll lean more right. And that's the best we can do.
And maybe we need more transparency so that people aren't just like, imagining the bad things that the other side is probably doing behind the whatever.
Yeah, the camel's nose under the tent. Okay, Adam, very nicely done. Thank you so much for bringing that, and we will be following your adventures in Oklahoma. We're going to stay in touch, and maybe I'll have to have you on the show down the road when you've got some kind of Oklahoma study, and you can tell us all about it.
Sounds great.
All right. Well, that is all the time we've got for this week. So until next week,
I'm David Griffith,
and I'm Mike Petrilli of the Thomas B. Fordham Institute, signing off.
The Education Gadfly Show is a production of the Thomas B. Fordham Institute, located in Washington, D.C. For more information, visit us online at fordhaminstitute.org.